Hello, welcome to Ray Recommends. My name is Raymond Antrobus. I'm here with next generation poet, short story writer, teacher. Wrote one of my favourite poetry books, which I've spoken about on Ray Recommends before, called Chick. Hello, Hannah Lowe.
Hello.
We're in your kitchen.
Yeah, it's a bit stark.
Really nice setup. It's raining outside.
We're in salubrious wood green, where the winds of change are not blowing.
First thing I thought to ask you about, because you write, you don't just write poetry. At what point does a poem become a short story, or a short story become a poem? Just because, like, I've also dabbled in a bit of short story writing, and there's stuff that I've abandoned halfway and been like, no, I'm going to make this a poem. Actually.
For me, they're really similar modes, actually. But that's because my poetry is predominantly narrative.
Yeah. So,
like, in my narrative poems, normally that form, that container, doesn't allow for like many characters, or temporally it needs to be pretty compressed. You can't sort of be telling a story in a poem over years. I mean, you can, but mine don't. And for me, a short story is the same. It's a small world and a small view. When I've written short stories, it's possibly because I want to be more polemical or political, and I need the space to do so. Like, I couldn't make the point in the poem. So like the short story that I most recently had published, Rat, which is all about sort of the housing crisis and refugees, it just wouldn't have worked in a poem. Yeah. And that's just an instinctive thing I knew from the beginning. I think it's an interesting difference, the difference between memoir and poetry, because that's probably in my work, where there's a distinction that's perhaps worth exploring more, which is that when I was originally writing all my poems about my family ancestry, and I didn't know much about it, what a poem allows you to do is to ask questions. You can write a poem all about silence and absence and longing and desire for knowledge and that kind of stuff. Whereas a memoir, you need to know, you need content. Yeah. And when you can say things like, well, this part of my life is hazy, or my memoir, but so-and-so tells me, or you can say in a memoir, perhaps I'll never know this. But generally, a memoir is going to be at least 60,000 words. You can't fill it with questions and absences. Who wants to read that? Blank space. So that I think is an interesting difference.
Do you think about who's going to be reading your work? Like, is that ever coming to mind? Like, I read a quote, I think it's in this month's poetry review, which I thought was interesting. I actually underlined it, and it said something like, poets shouldn't be writing to no one.
That's interesting. If I'm brutally honest, not so much now, but certainly when I was writing Chick, I probably had Mimi Calvati sat on my right or left shoulder, and I think that's probably true for a lot of people, And maybe Mimi and my writing group that I've been in for 7 years, with Fiona Moore and Jerry Orlintansky, a group of women, probably them next, because they would be the people that would see the poems next. Often, perhaps Richard, my partner, also a poet, Richard Price, I'll be thinking about. So, that very immediate, but also like totally pragmatic, that they are the people that are going to see the poem first.
Your book is still doing the rounds in my family,
that's nice.
Because we still have, we both have a lot of things in common.
Definitely.
And, as soon as I read your memoir, gave it to my mom. Then my mom gave it to my cousin Dean. And now at the moment it's gotten as far as the top, the edges of Hackney. I reckon it's next going to be going to Luton.
That's
some Jamaican.
That's so nice to know. And in fact, I've had quite a few emails from people that somehow came across the book and have done the same thing. They're passing it around their family because they come from a kind of mixed heritage background similar to mine. Jamaican. In one case, someone that had very similar, like a grandparent, a grandfather was Chinese and a grandmother was Black Jamaican. He said, "This is my book," she said. There's so many things in common, and that's been really lovely. I wasn't expecting that.
We had this conversation once about passing.
Yeah, right? We touched upon it, didn't we?
We touched on it, and it was like we were talking about. I think the anxieties or the advantages of passing, and by passing, I guess I mean passing is white or passing is more European. What do you think that there are any disadvantages to that?
Oh, I think actually, in some ways, my thinking about this is changing all the time.
Yeah.
But I think I've often seen it as a disadvantage, actually, because I think I have had a real longing all my life to say what I am and not what I look like.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think, if really probing it, the thing that stopped me in my younger years from saying to someone who was more obviously of a Caribbean heritage, I too have that, is I always wondered, they thought, well, how can you possibly align yourself with me or identify with me because you haven't had the trouble that I've had, you haven't had the struggle that I've had. And so I think, because when I was growing up, honestly, to be in the school that I went to, the very multicultural primary school, racism was so demonised, and rightly so. But to be a racist was about the worst thing you could be. I remember, like, me and my little friends, 6, 7, 8, reporting on each other. Miss, she's a racist.
Oh, it still happens. Yeah. I've still seen that.
We used to say racist. Miss, I'm a racist. Or she's a racist. But I think I grew up with this. That was the absolutely worst thing that you could be. And so the idea that I would try and identify with, in some way, came an experience that I hadn't had, has always been a real burden to me, I think. But now I think, you know, why have that very negative thing, that very negative energy, sort of stop me from making connections, also stop other people from making connections with me, you know. But it's taken a long time, a lot of thought and courage, I think, to say that.
Yeah.
How do you feel about it?
I started reading, I started getting philosophical about it. I started reading different, like, German philosophers, and they were talking about the issues of identity and claiming a identity, and how many gates that can close to letting in other people and other ideas and other possibilities about yourself, where you belong and where you could belong. But something that I found, something that jarred me, is that I realised that all of these philosophical ideas were coming from white men who themselves have enjoyed extreme amount of privilege. So they,
probably security of identity.
You know what I mean? Like, so I mean, I don't even want to write that off as you know, something that doesn't make what they have to say valid. But like you, I think I'm on a journey with that. I feel like there are a lot. I feel mostly at a disadvantage of it for the same thing, about having to kind of explain myself and having to prove myself to kind of different, you know, groups. I've been even having an anxiety, you know, when I was back in Jamaica just fairly recently. My cousin, I met one of my cousins for the first time, and he just said to me, oh, we're cousins. Oh, I thought you were Italian. And I was like, yeah, cool. I mean, but... And
you really, what you've missed there is that kind of like, come into my arms, you're my brother kind of moment. Yeah, I had the same thing going to Jamaica, actually, when I wanted to get in touch. I wanted to find out more about my Chinese grandfather, and a really wonderful woman, Jeanette Kong, a filmmaker in Canada, Chinese filmmaker, who had made films about the Chinese in Jamaica, put me in touch with lots of people in Jamaica, the Chinese Benevolent Association. And then on Skype, a few days before I was going to go, she said to me, Hannah, take some photographs of your dad and any other family members on that side, because no one is going to believe you, and a lot of doors are going to close unless you take the evidence, you know. And so, but I think, you know, it's a constant negotiation.
It is,
really. And it's taken me a long time to kind of realise that I don't have to be hard on myself about it, you know. Like, I can actually look at my position and say, actually, maybe that hasn't been easy. Other people don't have it easy either. But the way in which race has constricted and constructed society, and that is not something that came from me, has made lots of people unhappy, right? Yeah. And lots of people troubled. Yeah. And some way worse than others.
No, of course, and that's interesting, isn't it? When you have, you know, you think about it as a hierarchy of pain, a hierarchy of suffering, and this kind of idea that, like, my blackness has suffered more than your white feminism, you know, and it's going to come into
exactly.
And I mean, that's so based on an assumption, and I understand the politics, and I understand the statistics, and I understand the history, but when it gets to a personal level, I find it really problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. But then, of course, there are the kind of things like statistics which indicate that had I looked racially different, I may well have not, and I think in real great probability would not have had the life that I've had, and the access, perhaps, to some of the things that I've had, or not. Who knows? I mean, and how much can we double guess these things and go mad from it?
Yeah.
You know, I guess, and also I just think our levels of identity, you know, we're sort of performing consciously and unconsciously many different identities all of the time. And I'm actually kind of happy with that. You know, as much as I am, you know, a writer of mixed heritage, I'm also a girl from Essex. I'm also a North London mum, you know, and many other things as well. And they all make sense to me, those roles. So I can carry them all, and I want other people to be able to carry them all. And I want to be able to do that when I look at other people and say, you're not this one thing or this other thing. We, you know, it's a sign of intelligence to me that we can hold many complicated ideas in our head at the same time, you know.
Walt Whitman, we exist inside multitudes, something like that.
Right, perfect. Right, you are coming out with all Ray is on it. He's been to the library.
So you have a book coming out in June. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the book is in 3 sequences, and I suppose that the more I think about it, you know, I just had to write an essay actually about the book for my PhD, talking about my own poetics and what I was doing in the book. And I suppose the book, I guess I took some of the positive reception of Chick. When people said, you know, here is someone that's writing about multiculturalism and writing about her ancestry, I guess I took great heart from that, and it gave me the confidence to go off and sort of further explore in ways that you have, you know, as well, my sort of Caribbean and Chinese background. So one of the things I do in the book, I go back and I reenact the life of Joe Harriet, who was a Jamaican jazz saxophonist, my dad's cousin. Yeah. For me, a really important figure, a very difficult man I should add, but a really important figure is someone in my family that is a creative producer, so like a role model for me in some ways as well. But in writing about Joe, I'm definitely claiming that Jamaican lineage. The second sequence goes back and reenacts that kind of immigrant voyage. So the first section focuses on migrant aesthetics and the way Joe impacted the jazz scene in London in the 50s and 60s, and also the way in which he was stunted, probably as a black musician. The second sequence goes and looks at the kind of immigrant journey and sort of puts a kind of small challenge out there to the Windrush story by saying there were other boats, because my dad came on a boat before the Windrush. Yeah. And then the third sequence, I think, is the most multifarious and complicated, but it's all about mixed race. It's all about the language that's been used to denigrate people of mixed race backgrounds. And that's not just in Britain, that's also some of the kind of terms that existed in Chinese Jamaican culture about mixed raceness. And yeah, that's essentially what the book does. And formally it's doing some... It's much more experimental than anything I've ever written. It's trying to mimetically reproduce ideas of mixedness through the layout of the poem and the typography. It's like a poem, these poems, some of them are like poem mashups. I've called the form a borderliner. When you take one poem and you stick it sort of next to the other with a kind of porous border in between. And there's 2 ways of reading. You can read the one column, you can read another column, and then you can read maybe in a third space the meanings straight across the line.
Yeah, I've read. You've been getting some of them published. So
a few of them have been published, yeah. And I mean, I'm not quite sure how that is going to be received. I don't think they're easy on. I don't think they're easy on the eye or the brain. You know, I think they're a more complicated reading experience, and sometimes even I look at them and think, oh, I can't bother to read that. I'll just read a sonnet, you know, instead.
Yeah.
So we'll see, but
mixed race poems, a mixed race poetry form or mixed poetry. I mean, just joining form and content and.
Yeah, and I think it's the whole idea of putting the kind of border between 2 poems, but allowing that border to be porous. You know, so that's kind of what I was trying to get at. But it might be that the thinking is more complicated than the reality of the poem can contain. But I at least hope it will get readers, that people that read the poems thinking.
Yeah.
You know.
Hannah Lowe, a woman who contains multitudes, I believe that was actually the Whitman thing. We contain multitudes. Thank you so much. I'm going to be looking out for your book.
Thank you. Thanks, Ray.
And I'm sure we're going to be
Well, we're going to sit in the kitchen for another couple of hours actually, just chatting. So
I've got some milk toothpaste to prepare that I'd like to try.
And the Spaceman toothbrush.
Ray recommend.